episode number 112. You can get all the show notes and resources at dadhackers.us/112. What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Well, Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God has created and called us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. Now, on this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive deep into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, a Christian husband, a Christian father, and a Christian leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale and experiences of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm so thankful that you've joined us today. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of our value-packed episodes. Also, please make sure you leave an honest review if you're listening to this in iTunes or any other platform that takes reviews. Reviews boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I also wanted to let you know that we do have a free private Facebook group just for Christian dads. So after the show, make sure you hop on over to the show notes. There's a link for that in there as well. George, how are you doing today, man?
I'm just fine.
Good.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Sure. It is an honor to get to talk to you. For the guys that regularly listen to the podcast, George Faull is Kendall Faull's dad. And Kendall was actually the first interview that we released on the Dad Hackers podcast. And then he's also Jeff Faull's dad. And we interviewed Jeff Faull, I believe it was back in episode 19. So you have to go way back to check those out. But we have the guy that they were talking about and a lot of the stories that they told about growing up. And so we have him with us today. So I'm really excited to talk with you, George. So why don't you, George, tell us, just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, maybe your upbringing in your context as a Christian, as a man, as a father, grandfather, great-grandfather, all that stuff.
Yeah, okay. My dad was a preacher. My name is George Faull. And actually his father was kind of a lay preacher. And I think his father was a lay preacher, but those two were Methodists. But my dad was not, and he became a Christian at 32. And when he became a Christian, whatever Dad did, he threw his whole heart into something. And he was a very powerful man. And he had 6 kids, and all of his kids remained in the Lord and were serious about the Lord. And so I've been preaching for 60 years. And like I said, Jeff and Todd and Kendall were my 3 boys, and Laurel and Melody were my 2 girls. And like Kendall, I am divorced. My wife divorced me about 42 years ago, something like that. I never remarried, and I raised my 2 boys, and then my daughter came to live with me, and then Kendall came to live with me. So I've raised all of my kids, all except Laurel. Laurel left probably about 13 years old. Her mom moved Kendall and Laurel and Melody down to Missouri. So that was hard on me. But I have been preaching for a good many years. I preached in Illinois, and I preached in Missouri. And then I started church when I was a junior in college, which was kind of unusual.
Wow.
And then I moved to Iowa and preached. And then I went to New England and helped start churches in Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine. And then I came back and I preached in Indiana ever since, and had good ministries. 34 years ago, well, actually before that, in 74, I started a school called Treaty Institute for Evangelism. And it was a correspondence school. And we did have one regular class a week. But when my wife divorced me, I turned that over to Joe Garman, and that is now called American Bible Academy. And I turned it over to him when we had 14,000 students in 4 years. And he's taken it up way over 100,000 now. And he has many, 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 many prisoners, and also Air Force and Army people taking courses. And he's just done an excellent job. Then in 84, I started Summit Theological Seminary, and it was correspondence with just a class or two a week. But I bought a dormitory here, and I bought 2 buildings for $20,000. They were dorms for the Air Force, and I started remodeling one of them. And the owners that did have it liked it. What I did so well, they turned around and gave me my $20,000 back. The good thing about this, schools never ask for money. And we're 35 years old, and we don't ask anybody but God for money. We are great believers that money follows ministry, and we give free tuition to preachers and wannabe preachers. And we've got students now all over the world. And I never dreamt when I called it that we would teach the word to the whole world. We had no idea that we would influence the whole world. So we've stayed busy at that, and we have since appointed Terry Carter, my successor, as president of the school. And now that I've learned how to spell Chancellor, then I'm the Chancellor. So that's pretty much, I am a father and a grandfather and a great-grandfather. And that's what that gray hair is doing up on top of my head.
It's a crown of glory, right?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Yeah. Well, man, George, you have quite a resume there with all the different things that you've accomplished and you've done over your life, and just the reputation that you have around the churches and everything. But even more importantly, the reputation you have with your children, that really came out with the interviews that I did with Kendall and with Jeff. And so I'd really like to focus a lot of our conversation on talking about some of the things that you did, the impact that you've had, because one of the things that I'm really big on trying to be purposeful and intentional with myself and the guys that I work with is not just looking at our kids, but looking at a multi-generational kind of legacy. And you're like smack dab right in that. Pardon me?
Yeah. Just passing it on to your kids to be like you. Legacy, that's what you want, is that the kids will try to be the kind of fathers and Christians they ought to be. That's important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. And not just the next generation, but the generations that follow from them, and keep passing that baton on and on and on, and until Christ returns, you know, ideally.
Yes.
So I emailed back and forth with Jeff a little bit, and he had some things he wanted me to ask you about, and I thought they'd be good points to kind of hit on. And he mentioned your generosity. Can you talk a little bit maybe about ways that you were generous to your children, and also the importance of being generous as a father?
Well, it was in 1970. Of course, I went out and started new churches at my own expense. And but I came back, and when I landed in Michigan City, Indiana, I made $100 a week. But when I was in New England, I went into the insurance business. And I've sold insurance annuities for 55 years of those 60 years that I've preached. And I'm a good salesman, and I made a lot of money. And I didn't have a lot of money when we were first married. And when I started having kids and we moved to Michigan City, like I said, I'd make $100 a week. And I was given $15 a week, and I said, I don't want to give $15 a week. I want to give more. And this is the honest truth. I decided I was going to give 30 a week. And I was selling for John Hancock. And 2 weeks after I doubled my giving, God doubled my income.
Wow.
Because John Hancock called me in and said, you're a good salesman. We think you could be better. And we're going to give you a guaranteed salary for 2 years without paying back. That's on top of my commissions. And so then I was making $200 a week. And that got me out of debt. And I always have taught the kids, you cannot outgive God. My brother used to work for an outstanding Christian from Mowequa, Illinois, and Assumption, Illinois. And Leroy Trulock had been a fellow that had really, really, really helped a lot of churches. In fact, he loaned me the money to build the Michigan City church. And then you'd pay him back, and then I could go to get the financing because I had equity, because now I had a building that they could use as equity. But he had a motto that he lived by, and it rubbed off on me. And that is, if God is your partner, make your plans big. And so I have taught my kids, and every one of my, especially my boys, are excellent givers. And they really give. I'm very, very happy to see their giving. But I think that's true, that if God's your partner, make your plan big, and that you cannot outgive God. And I read about George Mueller, who had an orphanage, who he never asked for money. Now, he'd let people know the need because they'd write and ask him, but he never begged for money. I like that. And so 35 years ago, when I started Summit, we never made a request for money. And I think it's amazing that the school has lived on what God's given us from his people. Money follows ministry. And God won't forget your work and labor of love. And so I've taught my kids that. And I have been generous with my kids. I used to have a thing with my kids, and they'd figure out a way to make some money. And one day, Jeff saw something he wanted in a store, and it was more than he had. And so he came to me and he said, Dad, is there any way I can make some money? And I said, why? He said, well, I want this thing. I don't even remember what it was. And I said, sure. And so I gave him different jobs to do, and he earned it. Well, the other kids would take their nickels and dimes and head down to the store and buy a pop or candy bar, but Jeff saved it. And when I saw how serious he was about saving for that, even when he did not yet have that much money, I gave him the difference because I knew he really wanted it. And I feel the same way about myself as a Christian. If God sees that I really want to do something, if I seek first the kingdom of God, he'll give me what I need. Ask, seek, knock. A-S-K. And he's the one, he says, I'm the one who gives you power to get wealth. Well, if he's the one that gives me power to get wealth, I'm not going to ask you for it. I'm going to ask him for it. Drop the middleman. And if they want to give, they see what we're doing, fine. But the boys have learned that. And one year, Kendall left a church, and he had a good paying church, and he just started preaching abroad, everywhere, not abroad, but around wherever we could get him a preaching appointment. He made more money that year than he did when he had the full-time church. And
Wow.
so he saw firsthand that you can't outgive God, that he will meet your needs. He made a promise. He's not a man that he should lie, nor the son of man that he should repent. Hath he not said it, and shall he not make it good? And he does. And that might have been what Jeff was referring to. And Jeff is generous sometimes almost to a fault. And my brother was that way. And I would encourage everybody to get their house in order by trusting God to supply your needs. Didn't say your wants, but your needs. He will supply them.
Yeah, that brings up a question that was kind of ringing in the back of my mind as you were talking about how God has blessed you financially in those ways. Is what about the guy that's really struggling, maybe struggling in ministry with finances, doesn't have a lot of money, has a family, maybe he's not even in ministry, maybe he has a regular normal secular job. What kind of advice would you give for a guy right now that's struggling to make ends meet?
I wouldn't cheat God. In other words, God knows you. And I always like to point out there in Acts 10, he talked about to Cornelius, and he said his name was Simon, whose surname is Peter, whose house is by the seaside, lives in Joppa. I mean, he knew all about Peter. And so he knows our needs. But if you're unfaithful with little, he isn't going to give you much. And so the good book plainly says, give and it'll be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will men give into your bosom. And so if I was in that shape again, I would definitely not cheat God, and I would stretch, because you can't outgive him. And it's very, very important to realize that truth, that he wants you to stretch a little, and he isn't going to leave you high and dry. He just doesn't do it.
So this is another question that kind of follows from that. So a lot of guys are married, and maybe they desire to give more, but it really scares their wife because
Yes.
maybe she has some security issues or something of that nature. Do you have any advice for guys in that kind of situation where maybe they want to give more, but they're also trying to meet the needs of their family and take their wife into consideration and those kind of things?
Well, there's a personal illustration, not me involved, but I got to be careful here. I don't want to drop names, but the man wanted to give more. The wife didn't want to give more. And he got a raise, and so he didn't tell her. And he is very generous. And so Jeff went there, and Jeff offered to pay for the pizza. And so they all ate pizza, but she never knew that Jeff didn't buy the pizza, that her husband bought the pizza. And one day, a man drove up, and he handed this man some money. And his wife said, after he left, well, the guy said to him, said, you gave me some money, and now I'm in a position to help you. And so the wife said, what do you mean? Did you give him money? And she said, yes. How much? And he told her $500. And she just got upset. He showed her the check, and the man had given him back $5,000.
Wow.
And he said, I don't want you ever mentioning money again. Well, she never did. From what I was told, she's not that way. She's a different person. And I still say that it's not because people are selfish that they don't give. They lack faith. What you need to be a good giver is faith. Offering plate used to go by, a missionary in there, and I'd want to give to him, and I didn't think I could afford it. But then I started giving what I wanted to give, and that's a fun way to live, to watch the money come in. I get money for the school here, and they thank me for things I've done, years ago, or sometime they heard me preach. I don't remember them. And so God is able to move people to help it. Money follows ministry. If you're doing God's work and you're being faithful, what you preach, God will give you the money.
You mentioned this idea of get your house in order. Can you explain that a little bit more?
I think you do need to learn how to get out of debt. I didn't do this once. I must have done it a half a dozen times. I have sold my library probably 4 or 5 times in my ministry. Sold good books that I had. I figured I could get them later again, just to keep from going in debt. If you got assets, sell what you have and stay out of debt. And I have done that when I was younger, many, many, many times. And then I came to the place that God blessed me enough. I didn't need to sell my library. And I really am a believer in getting out of debt, not to the point that you cheat God, but I'm talking about whatever assets you've got. You don't have to have a new car. I've got a 2004 Cadillac, and it cost me $4,200. And it's a sharp looking car, and I go places and people say, man, it's a good looking car. And look how old that is. That's 17 years old or more, 16, 17 years old. And so if you don't have to have expensive cars and fancy houses and even fancy furniture, the important thing is to seek first the kingdom of God. And kids notice that. Kids notice that. When you can meet their needs and they know that you've sacrificed, it makes a difference. Evidently, Jeff asking you that question, he must have been very conscious about that fathers give good gifts to their children.
So you've mentioned this idea, seek first the kingdom. You've mentioned that several times in our discussion so far. How about explaining what that means in your life and how you've sought first the kingdom, particularly with your family in raising children?
Well, I was strict, disciplinarian, number one, and that's what I see missing in those families today. I think one of the most important thing you can do is to be consistent. So consistent that the kids will know what you're going to say and what you're going to do about certain situations. And that gives you security. Just for example, my daddy did that. My dad didn't trust a certain boy and a certain girl in my youth group when I was a boy. And if I don't know whether you were like me, but sometimes you didn't want to do some of the things that the kids wanted to do. Now, if it was my friend Richard or Benny, I probably wanted to do it. And so I would say, Dad, can I such and such? And I knew what he was going to say. Who's going to be there? And I'd name everybody that's going to be there. If I didn't want to go, all I had to do is say those two kids that he didn't trust. And if I did want to go, maybe a little deceitful on my part, I don't know, but I wouldn't mention they were going to be there. You can't believe how that security made me feel, because my dad was consistent and I knew what he was going to say and knew what he was going to do. And Dad didn't bend from that, and I didn't bend from that. And that's what I mean by seeking first the kingdom of God. What's good for this kid to do? What's bad for him? For example, I always had the kids come in my yard. My kids didn't go to the neighbors down the street or across town to jump on a trampoline. I had the trampoline, and they jumped on the trampoline in my yard. I had the three-wheeler. I had the go-kart. I had the mopeds. And they came to my house. And if a kid was in my yard cussing, I told him he could learn how to cuss at home, but he wasn't going to cuss in my yard in front of my kids. And evil companions corrupt good manners. And it is important to try to regulate who they're going to be with. And so if kids seeing you put your money where your mouth is, and you're giving money to missionaries, and everything is centered around God, I just think they're going to pick it up. And I think that consistency is very, very, very important. And if they see you putting other things in front of the work of God, I think you're going to have problems convincing them that you're really converted. One thing I think is really important is you never, ever lie to your kids. One of the best compliments I ever got, and this was just a couple of years ago, Kendall was talking to a class here at the school, and he said, I have never, ever, ever, ever heard my dad lie to me. And that meant a lot to me that he said that, but I can't think of any time I did ever lie to him. And I think that's why they trust you. And they know you won't lie and bend the rules. We do have a joke about Dad, though, about me. Once in a while I'd speed, and the boys would bawl me out. And I'd see, ever hear of an ox in the ditch? So they tease me to this day about that. They'll say, hi, got any oxes in the ditch? Yeah. And so that was an inconsistency on my part. And I learned not to do that. But every single thing the kids need to see. Now, he's trying his best to obey God. And also another thing, this happened with my dad, and this happened with me. My dad and my boys, rather, met the most influential, godly men sitting around our table. I had the finest of preachers. There's hardly one of the great preachers in the last 50 years that my boys haven't met, because when I was at Hillsboro Family Camp, I didn't do this on purpose. I just noticed that everybody thought that the great man that was speaking wasn't invited to dinner. So I started inviting them for dinner and take them out for dinner in my car, because they didn't have their cars with them. And I'd take them out. And my sons have eaten dinner with the most influential, good preachers in the brotherhood. And they've been in my home, and even when I was married. Laura was a good hostess, and she I was a strong disciplinarian. She was more gentle, but she was also firm. And I remember Don Duell laid at our house one day, and the 5 kids sat there. And when they sat there quietly, he told me, he said, "That's the first time I've been able to have a meal with a preacher, with the kids here, and I didn't have to, what shall I say, overrule the kids because they sat there and listened. And those boys worshiped the ground that Don walked on. And I did. I had influential preachers all the time around them. And no wonder 2 of them ended up being preachers. And Todd, I had a guy named Harvey Waddlow come and hold a meeting. And Brother Waddlow got underneath the car. He was holding a meeting for me, and he got underneath Todd's car and helped him fix it. And if you know Harvey, you know a great fellow. So that's one of the best things a father can do, is to be given to hospitality, have people in their home, and get the influence of those godly men recognized by your children. And you'll have better kids. It really influences. I've noticed that Kendall and Jeff both talked to you, that they said I taught as we did things. And like the Father said, the Bible says, when you lay down, when you get up, when you walk by the way, and so forth.
Yeah.
I really did that with my kids. And you got to know the word to do that. But I remember going through Fort Wayne. We'd drive through there, and some hookers would be along the side of the road soliciting lovers. And I'd go by them and I'd say, "Now there's a deep ditch." And my boys would say, "What does that mean?" Well, I told them what it meant. And I bet you they still do that. I bet when they see one of those girls, I bet they say, "Now there's a deep ditch." Well, that's in their mind. And it's very, very, very important to teach as you go. They teach by what they see. They teach by what they hear. And they teach, or they learn, I shouldn't say teach. They're taught by what they see and by what they hear and what you taught them. And that'll make a difference in your kids. They can't go to school 8 hours a day and with you 1 or 2 hours and expect that there's going to be equality here of knowledge. You've got to teach them the scriptures.
All right, guys, wanted to take a quick second to tell you about the Iron Men Mastermind. If you're looking for a band of brothers that you can lock shields with, that can go to battle with you in the day-to-day life, who are also in the trenches going through the same struggles and the same challenges that you are going through, I suggest you check out the Iron Men Mastermind. This mastermind was developed and designed for Christian men to help us become the men that God has created and called us to be. And it's designed to help us increase our relationship with God, increase our relationship with our wives, increase our relationship with our children, and begin to provide better for them financially, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, relationally, in all of those areas, those things that wake you up in the middle of the night. These are the kinds of things that we work on. These are the kinds of ways that we can help you out in the Iron Men Mastermind. If this is something that is of interest to you, you may want to join the Iron Men community, and you can check out more information at dadhackers.us/Ironmen, one word, Iron Men there. All right, now back to our show. So I know as all the work that you did, you're very, very busy man. Can you talk about how you structured your day so that you were able to get the influence and impact with your children? Because I know that's a very difficult thing for a guy to do today, because everybody's, busy
Yes.
almost 24 hours a day. And, how did you structure things so that you could have the time? Because it takes a lot of time to raise kids well.
Well, I tell you, one thing I did was I had a to-do list, and I put them in order. And my rule was do what you don't want to do first. I'm not good at hospital calling, and I'm not good at old folks' homes. I don't like to do it. I feel like I'm one of Job's friends, miserable comforter. But I always did that the very first thing. After I ate breakfast, I would go to the hospital, to the nursing homes, and get the jobs that I didn't like to do and that I wasn't good at doing first. That way I had the rest of the day. And so I would go to my office in the morning after I had visited, and then in the afternoon, the kids got home at 3:30, and I would be home by 3:30 when the kids got off the bus, and I would stay with my kids till 6:30, and I got to play with them for those 3 hours. But I knew I was going to go calling at night, and so after 6:30, I would go calling, and I usually wouldn't get home maybe till 9 or even 9:30, and so that gave me time with my wife alone. But it also I got some time. Not many fathers spend 3 hours a day with their kids, but you can do it if you follow that prescription I just said. And not only that, you do what you're doing happily, because if you do what you don't like to do, you don't think you're good at doing, then you got a big advantage there, because the rest of the day you feel good about your ministry. And so I would divide my day up like that. Do what you don't particularly like to do, you don't think you're good at doing, and do what you got to do. Spend some time with your kids, but if you know you're going to go calling that night, then go calling. But don't go calling until you spend some time with your kids. And that worked for me. And even when I was divorced, the boys were at school, and so I had all day before they came home from school at 3:30. I had all day to do what I had to do, and then I would usually go calling that night. But they saw me when they came home, and they saw me on weekends more, of course, because they were there. It works. And I took my boys with me. Probably the reason my boys are all three excellent drivers. I am a lousy driver. I have a tendency to look around when I'm driving. Still do, I'm unfortunate. But I've had a lot of wrecks. But my boys, they are good. And but when they got old enough to drive, Jeff went with me, and then Kendall, Todd went with me, and then Jeff went with me, and they've traveled all over the United States with me when I've traveled all over the United States preaching. And you can really get close to your boy. You can answer their questions. And I always involved my boys in the conversations. When I used to take Kendall back from Huntington, or rather from Woodburn, Indiana to Huntington, I'd talk to him, and he'd say, Dad, you preached such and such tonight. Yeah. Well, if what you said is true, then this also is true. And I'd about drive off the road. I couldn't believe that an 8-year-old boy could reason that deep. And that's probably one of my biggest complaints is people today insult kids, and they don't think kids catch anything. But even as an old man preaching, kids will come up to unsolicited and give me pictures of what I preached about. They were listening. And sometimes the kids had to explain to the grandmas what I meant. And kids are not dumb. And I'm a firm believer. I had a rule that my boys had to give me the notes of what I preached on. One day I was sitting in my chair and I had Jeff go get me his notes and my notes from what I preached. And I had 2 words on my page he didn't have on his page. And I think that that's why Jeff is a tremendous outliner. And Kendall's my thinking man. He's my original thinker. And Jeff is my orator. And I think that making kids take notes of what I preached was one of the best things I ever did. Very, very, very important. And I don't know whether I stayed on the subject you asked about, but that's something I did want to say. I recommend every father takes the kids to church. And that's one of the things I'm not fond about junior church. I like for the whole family to worship together if they possibly can. And then the dad can quiz, what did the preacher say? What did he mean? Do you understand what he said? And you also get to know whether what was said was true. Because you heard the same message and you can say, well, I think the preacher here, I need to talk to him about this because I think what he said here, he wasn't right. And today, you just can't turn kids over to a youth minister or even a senior minister. Nobody today believes what they used to believe. Dean Mills said to me one time, in fact, he said it publicly. He said, I don't know who I'm having preach here next year at Hillsboro, except the regulars, because I'm afraid to ask anybody to preach because I don't know if he'll believe next year what he believes this year. And it's a truth. Our churches are changing so fast. They just don't mean it. But that thing of consistency, them knowing what you're going to say, knowing what you're going to do, what you're going to think about something, that's only done if you discipline and you tell them this is what the Bible says about that. I remember I came home one day and my daughter and her friend was in my living room and now they weren't bikinis, but they were swimming suits. I said, what are you doing with me? Take that thing off. And she said, well, her daddy bought them. They were alike. Her daddy let her have it. And I said, he's her daddy. You're my daughter. And get that suit off and take it back. Says, we can't take it back. I said, then you're out the money. You're not dressing like that. I think it's the only argument that I remember having with that daughter. The only one I remember. And she cried around and she fussed, and I was sitting in my office and she just was banging in the kitchen with the pans, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And Todd walked in. That's her brother. And Todd came in and he said, what's the matter, Melody? And she told him. And he took her into his arms, and he's older than her, and he was in his 20s by this time. Todd made it easier for me to be a good father. And he took her into his arms and says, now you know you're not going to change Dad's mind. You know, no matter what noise you make, Dad's not going to change his mind. That's core with him. And so you might as well just forget it and throw the suit away. And she did. That's the only argument I ever remember having with my daughter. And hopefully the girl's father made her throw it away too. I don't know. But I'm just simply saying, he knew I wasn't going to change my mind. Pouting, crying, it wasn't going to make any difference. And I really, really, really believe that what is missing today is discipline. I started to get on an airplane here a while back, and there was this little mean brat running around, disobeying his parents, sassing them. And back then I had a big voice. I don't have the big voice I used to have. And I said, I'd like to have that kid for about a day. And people looked at me and nodded their head, yes and down, up and down, in agreement with me. But the parents heard it because they were going down the chute. And they turned around and looked at me. And boy, they gave me a dirty look. And I said, not discipline that child is child abuse. I said, that boy of yours don't have a chance till you get back on that throne. And people thanked me. They were standing there. Nobody turned me in. But I just am a firm believer that that's what's missing in our society today. The Bible says if you love your child, you'll spank him, you'll discipline him. And that infers that if you don't love your child, you don't discipline. People sometimes say to me, well, I didn't ever spank my kids. And I thought, yeah, I can believe that. And you didn't even have to tell me. I already knew it. Because the Bible teaches plainly that children are to be disciplined if they're loved. And I do believe it's child abuse not to discipline a child. You are giving a great disadvantage to your children. And they're going to grow up and they're going to find out. You might not ever say anything to them to correct them, but their employers will. And I doubt if the school teacher will, because they've tied their hands and they can't very well. But I really do believe that that helps. I always teach people that Dad had a spanking strap, used to be a strap for barbers to sharpen their thing.
Yeah.
And they said, did he really? And I said, no, not really. But if he'd had, he'd have hung it on the wall. He'd have put on there, I need thee every hour. But Dad was a very strict disciplinarian, too. I remember one time he was going to go away to camp, and he wasn't going to let me go. And I wanted to go to camp. But they were older kids than I was. And I was about 12, 13. But he was smart. I was standing on a cut-off tree, a stump. He rubbed my head, and he says, I can't take you to camp. Who's going to stay here and take care of Mom and your sisters? I got to leave you here to take care of your family. Man, old George puffed up like a puffing frog, and that did it. But there was a guy going around town at that time, window peeping, and he window peeped in my sister's room, and my dog started barking, and I opened the door, and the dog shot out and chased the guy, and he shot out by the garage. Well, I went and opened the garage door, and I walked in there and couldn't find him. And Dad came home, Mom told him what I'd done. And he said, George, did you go out to the door and chase that window peeper? I said, yeah. He said, come here. And I went to him, and he spanked me like I'd never been spanked. And I said, why did you do that? Did you look above your head in the rafters? No. What if he was up there? And he said, I'm giving you this spanking for being too brave. You didn't get hurt, so I got to hurt you. And he spanked me for chasing that guy in the garage. I really never forgot that. I remember one time Todd and Jeff were little, and this is important to start young. And they took and put sand in my brand new mower. in the gas tank. And I tried to start the mower, and it wouldn't start, and I opened it up, and there was sand in my gas tank. And I spanked them both, and I can still see those boys jumping up and down in the yard. Todd told me years later, a grown man, he said, the only time I remember you being unfair is when you spanked Jeff and I for putting gas in the mower. I said, well, let me ask you a question, Todd. Did you ever do it again? He said, no. I said, well, I'm glad I did it. And so it's just consistency is, to me, the name of the game. They know what Dad don't like, and they know what Dad does like. And they know that he will confront you. And that don't stop at 18. Some guys think, well, when I get the kid to 18, he graduates from high school, I fulfill my duty. But that's not true. All you got to do is think about Eli. His sons were priests. He should have removed them from the priesthood, and he didn't. And God sent a prophet to warn him, and then he had Samuel warn him, and he never learned anything from the warnings. And then Samuel's boys were judges, and you remember the people wanted a king like the other. Well, why? What was their reason for that? Because Eli never punished his boys and removed them from being judges. And Samuel actually caused Israel to stumble and won a king. And so that was partly Eli's fault. And David, the Bible says, never said he at any time, why have you done this? Those are three grown men with married children. But they still had a responsibility before God. And he removed Eli. And the judges, they were bad, took bribes, and it caused Israel to stumble. And David, you can't do one thing and then say another. You can't say, Hammond, you just can't take a girl because you want her. Why not, Dad? You did. Well, so why? He didn't say nothing. Because Hammond did what he did. He took his sister, but David took another man's wife. Well, Solomon, you don't need all these wives. Why not, Dad? You did. Mm-hmm. God plainly said kings are not to multiply wives. And just every one of David's boys, whether it was Ammon, Adonijah, you can't use a woman, Adonijah. Why not, Dad? You did. Because you remember he wanted that girl, Abishag, and he was going to use her to be the thing that would get him in as king. So you can't say one thing to your kids and do the other, because they're going to say, Dad, you did it. And so I guess that's what I mean by consistency. It's what I mean about seeking first the kingdom, making sure the kids know what you believe and why you believe it, and teaching them when you go down the street, when you're laying in bed and you're sitting in the chair, you're teaching your kids, and keep them in your own yard so that you can control who they're with and what kind of language they're hearing. I do want to say something about something else, because the boys have told me, and my girls, they have told me that one of the best things that I ever did was I had some things called Your Story Hour. And they're so good that it's part of a course that we teach. And there's 60 pre-recorded dramatized tapes. And the boys say, Dad, all you did, the thing that had the biggest influence on us, is those tapes. And there's Bible tapes, and then there's character building stories. I've sold those for years and years, ever since, probably I was 26 years old. I've sold those story hour tapes. And if the families would buy both sets, the Bible ones and the character building ones, I can't think of a family that I sold those to that lost their children to the world. And Jeff and Todd both tell me in their sermons, they remember those stories. Kendall preached Sunday on the story of Joseph. And if you know those Bible stories, it'll help you in your preaching, and they will come home to you and the lessons. And that's worth people checking into in raising kids. They need to hear good character building stories. One other thing I suppose that I'd want to talk about is the fact that I never, and this was my mom, and my wife, I should say, my wife and I never allowed the kids to tear down the other kid. We just never allowed that. And I remember two incidences that's interesting. One day, my daughter Laurel wrecked the boys' go-kart. And one of them, and both of them together, I guess, called her, "You idiot." Well, that's against our rules. You do not call your brothers and sisters names. You never picked on their flaws. And he wrote back to me this week and said, "Make sure you say what you did when we called her an idiot. We couldn't ride the go-kart for 1 week." But I taught them, do not pick on the flaws of your brother or your sisters. My one boy had a deformed ear. And I said to the other kids, don't you ever, ever, ever make fun of his ear. And he was probably 6th grade, maybe 7th. And one day he rushed into my office and he said, "Dad, a boy at school said that I had a deformed ear." I never even looked up. I said, "You've always had that." I said, "What difference does that make? Anything new at school?" He turned around and ran out of the room, and I called my wife and I said, "He's coming over. Someone told him about his ear." Keep in mind now, this kid was probably 6th or 7th grade. Ran in there and she was stirring potatoes. "Mom, boy at school told me that I got a deformed ear." Mom said, "We've always had a deformed ear. What difference does that make? How's everything going?" And went over and hugged him. He shot down to the bathroom, looked at his ear. He came back into his mom and said, "My ear is deformed." He had never noticed it. And I wouldn't let the other kids tell him about that. So he didn't suffer from that.
Yeah.
And so he started wearing his hair a little bit longer. And I let him. He wore it over the top of that ear so you couldn't see it. And I don't know to this day whether people know he's got a deformed ear. And to me, calling people names and letting your kids call the other kids stupid and having this sibling rivalry is not good. And I think that's part of being a good dad and a good mom, is just not to allow them to call each other names if they can probably do it. I got a lot of material I don't want to wear out. I'm not letting you ask questions. I'm not being very good at this.
Oh no, that's fine. These stories are so captivating, and it really opens the eyes to the behind the scenes of what went on. I did want to ask you real quick, because we do have to wrap it up. You mentioned consistency a number of times, And that's something that's very important to me, and that, I try to work on. And man, I feel so inconsistent a lot of times. What would you say to a dad who realizes that he's been inconsistent but wants to get back on track? Do you have some advice for like how to correct himself?
I would apologize to the kids.
Hmm.
In other words, I would say, I haven't been real consistent. I'm going to try to be more consistent. I want you to know by my example and what I say and what I rebuke you for and what I praise you for, I want you to know that I'm going to try to be more consistent, and you can expect my discipline to be more consistent and my rebukes to be more consistent. And if you start out doing something and then you keep on doing it, they're going to know you're consistent. One time my daughter didn't want to get up, and I said, "Time to get up and catch the bus, honey." And I said, "Now you're going to get up." And I walked into the kitchen. I filled a great big tall pan of water, hid it behind the door, and I said, "Come on and get up." She's playing like she's asleep. I threw that 2-quart thing of water on her, and I never seen anybody move so fast in my life.
Oh, wow.
And then I looked at her and showed her the wet bed, and I said, "You're going to sleep in that bed tonight." Oh, my wife's a gentleman. She put a plastic sheet on, but she did sleep in that bed tonight. I never one time had any trouble waking her up after that. And so I'm just simply saying, if you're consistent, and she wouldn't have dared. She knows I'd have done it again if she had ever tried that. And I'm not the perfect dad. That's probably evident from the fact I'm divorced. But I do think that I was a consistent dad. The kids knew what I believed, why I believed it. And I say again, that doesn't stop at 18 years of age. There isn't one of my married kids that I haven't rebuked. That does not end. You're still the dad. And just this week, I talked to one of my boys about something I didn't like. Part of it was, "Thus saith the Lord," part of it was opinion. And I never, and that's important, always explain, this is opinion, but this is a "thus saith the Lord." And I gave them room on opinions, but not on "thus saith the Lord's." And if God said it, that makes it true. And I believe it. One funny story I got to tell you about. My kids and I were going to my sister's daughter's wedding. My ex-wife said, and by that time we were married, still married, she said, "Todd don't want to dress up for the wedding." I said, "I'll talk to him." I went to him and I said, "You are going to wear a suit." And they still laugh and laugh and laugh at Dad. Real tactful. "You are going to wear a suit." And he did. But Jeff even reminded me about that in a letter that I did that. So there's a lot of things, a lot of stories that I have, but I love my kids. And because I love them, I disciplined them. And because I loved them, I gave to them. And because I loved them, I really tried to be a model to them. I tried to teach them the Word. And my boys know the Word, but a lot of it is they listen to those tapes. And only they weren't tapes then, they were records. Shows how long I've had those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, George, we're running out of time here. We could talk for hours, of course, about this stuff and many other topics, but I just want to say I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk about these things and to share your wisdom and your wealth of knowledge and experience. And it's been a blessing to me, and I know it'll be a blessing to the guys that listen to this later.
Well, I hope it is. And I hope fellas remember to pray that they can be good fathers.
Oh,
because
yeah.
he'll help you. He wants you to be a good father. So if you pray that you can be a good father, why wouldn't our Father answer that prayer?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, George, if guys want to get a hold of you or connect with what you're doing or the school, what's the best place that they can go?
I'd suggest that my phone number is 765-432-9849. Now, that's my cell phone. My website is www.summit1.org. And that one is the numerical one. My email is summit1@myvine.com. And the school's number is 765-472-4111.
Okay.
And if they're wanting to learn the Bible, we'd be glad to have them to check us out on the website and see if they'd be interested in taking courses from us. And also, that number there, the school, or the cell phone, either one, or email, if they got Bible questions, that's part of my biggest ministry, especially now that I'm older, is to just answer people's Bible questions. We really covet that opportunity to help people know the Bible better.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely get that information out there whenever we put this out so everybody can take advantage of it. Well, George, again, thank you for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it, man. It's been a blessing.
You do a good job, and I'm sorry I didn't let you ask many questions.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Not a problem.
You bet. God bless.
You too. All right, gentlemen, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope our conversation was a blessing to you and that you leave this episode better equipped to be the man and the father God has called and created you to be. If so, then I ask that you please leave us a 5-star rating and a quick written review in iTunes. Then make sure you head on over to the show notes to get all of the resources for this episode. While you're there, you can take part in our 5 Days to Be a Better Dad challenge, as well as get involved with our free Facebook community. All right, gentlemen, until next week, remember Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Stay sharp.